When we teach beginners, we usually tell them that they should castle as quickly as possible, and that is true to an extent. However, there are some major exceptions. For example, if you look at a position like this, where would you castle? Would you castle kingside or would you castle queenside? If you guys want to, you can pause the video to try to figure it out, but I'm going to tell you now. You should be looking to castle queenside in a situation like this. Now, why is that? Why can't you just castle kingside in a position like this? It's because of the pawn structure that your opponent has. Your opponent has these pawns right here, and especially this pawn right here, the pawn on e5. This makes it so you cannot develop the knight to f6. That's why the knight went to e7 instead, and this pawn greatly controls squares in black's side of the board, and it makes it hard to defend key squares in black's position, such as h7. First of all, if you were to castle here, you would lose immediately to a Greek gift sacrifice. Bishop takes h7, king takes h7, and then knight to g5, and queen h5, queen h7 on the next move. But going back, even if you play a move like h6 right here instead of castling, that still doesn't help you that much, because let's say after bishop e3 you castle anyways. You have so many pieces looking at this direction. So for example, this bishop right here, the other bishop, the knight on f3 can go to g5, the queen can go to h5, and the rook can also join the attack with a rook lift like rook h3, rook g3. And these are like 5 pieces that are aiming towards your lonely king, and the only defender that you really have are these 2 pawns and maybe the knight. So this is a very bad position for the black pieces. g4, g5 is coming, and this is just going to be very difficult to defend. Now, on the other hand, what happens if instead of that you go this way? Well, first of all, it's better to play a move like c4 to close the center down. The bishop has to move, okay, ignore these arrows, I forgot to remove them. You can castle queenside. So once you castle queenside, what's going on here? This is a semi-open file for the white pieces, and it might look dangerous at first glance, but it's really not, because the rook is the only piece that is attacking the black king, well, the squares around the black king, and the rook itself is not going to be enough. When we castled kingside earlier, we saw that there were 5 pieces aiming, these 5 pieces aiming at the king, 5 potential attackers. Here there is this one rook, there's maybe this bishop that can go to c1 and a3, and maybe this queen that can go to c1 and b2. So there are 3 potential attackers maximum. You can't attack this king on the queen side with the light square bishop. You can't attack it with the knight. And even if you are able to somehow bring these pieces over here to the queen side, there are many ways for black to defend with b6, a5. You can go with king b7, knight c8. You have many defensive setups. You have too many pieces protecting your king. In order for white's attack to work, white has to have more attackers than defenders, and these 3 are not going to be able to defeat these however many. This is like 7. You know, there are 7 pieces. Yes, I'm counting the pawns as well, because pawns are crucial defenders as well. So that means that there is no attack here for the white pieces, and you guys should not look at this position. Let me go back. You should not look at this position and make arbitrary judgments such as, oh, white has a semi-open b file, so I shouldn't castle here, when in fact your king is safer over here despite white having the semi-open b file, and your king is not as safe on the king side, despite the fact that there are no semi-open files, but there are many pieces looking in this direction. This is another example when you need to be very careful when castling one way or the other, in this case on the king side, because there are many potential sacrifices. Once again, if you castle here, you run into stuff like b5, knight a5, and then bishop takes h7 followed by knight g5. This is another Greek gift sacrifice. And the reason why all of this is caused for the black pieces, the reason why black is in so much trouble here is because of this pawn on e5. And this is just another example that I wanted to show you, because if you're able to get rid of this pawn, then you're going to be able to castle safely, because your pawns can move safely in order to defend your king. You can't just castle here right away. We just saw why with bishop takes h7. So you would have to do something like, let's say, h6 in order to stop all of that, and then you castle. But the problem is the attack still continues. You can't get rid of this pawn, and that creates a lot of problems for the black pieces here. And then this maneuver with queen e2 and then queen e4, very dangerous. Now, how are you defending against this? You have a couple of different options. Let's say you play either g6 or knight to g6, but the problem is the attack still continues. Rook to d1, and then potential h4, h5s exist. There are just too many ways that black can be attacked here, and you cannot stop everything with the black pieces. So that's why you need to be very careful. You need to be very mindful of castling kingside when there's a pawn on e5 for white. It doesn't mean that it's not possible. Well, in this case, it's very bad for black, but in some positions, despite white having a pawn on e5, it's still possible to castle kingside. Those are the types of positions where light square bishops are traded off, because this is one of the key attackers for the white pieces. So if you're able to trade it off, then it's safer to castle this way. And since this is the most dangerous attacker, it's going to be hard for white to attack, or harder, I should say. It's going to be harder for white to attack. But if that condition is not met, you need to be very careful when castling. You would rather just have your king in the center of the board. There is a fundamental concept that I want to show you, and this is after e4, e5. Let's say your opponent plays bishop to c4, and this is the position that I want you to look at. In a lot of e4, e5 positions, the problem is that there's a lot of open space. This pawn on f7 is usually weak. But if we compare this to other openings, the king is safer in the center. So when we teach beginners that they need to get out of the center as quickly as possible, that is typically in e4, e5 positions. And in these positions, getting the king out of the center very quickly is extremely justified. However, if we were to change the opening, let's say the Sicilian defense, right? Let's say e4, c5, and then bishop to c4, same moves, except, of course, instead of e5, we played c5. But in a position like this, bishop c4 is not a good move, and that's why in a lot of Sicilian positions, the king is actually safe in the center. You don't need to rush castling. Why? Because you haven't committed the pawn to e5. You actually played e6 instead, and you have this sort of a hat of pawns, and this hat is defending the king very well. You cannot get to this black king with the white pieces. If you go knight f3, knight g5, that doesn't do anything, and the king is very safe in the center when you have this sort of a structure. But in e4, e5 positions, you cannot go back with this pawn. So the pawn on f7 is permanently weak, so you're incentivized to actually castle as quickly as possible. But in other openings, you might not have to. That depends on the opening and the structure itself. Okay, so now I will show you an example of what I was just talking about. So let's say we play the Nimzo-Larsen opening, and we have this structure right here. So now this is with the white pieces, not necessarily with the black pieces, but we still have the same structure in front of our king. We have this hat of pawns, and our opponent played a move like bishop to g4. Now, in a situation like this, we can play bishop e2 and castle. That would be a very reasonable decision, but we don't necessarily have to do that. We can also play more aggressively with a move like h3 and then going g4 right away. And now, in this case, we're not going to be castling this way. Let's say the bishop goes back, we continue our attack, and then we go knight to h4, going after the bishop pair. If our opponent attacks the rook, that's fine, we just move the rook, we go d3, and our king is extremely safe. We don't need to castle over here. We can castle over to the queen side in the future, not right away, but of course in a couple of moves. That is a possibility that exists down the road. And let's say knight to d2, bishop to e7, we get a position like this. The point is that you don't need to rush castling in certain structures. And this is one of those structures where your king is extremely safe in the center of the board, so you don't have to rush castling. You can instead go after the bishop right away, get the bishop pair, and get a positional advantage early on. That way, after that, you can continue to finish your development, and then you can castle queenside. You can continue on with your business. But we have taken a detour in this opening. We didn't necessarily follow the principles. We played h3, g4. But since the king is safe, this is actually justified. There are no problems with doing this. And actually, in a lot of ways, it's more practical because we are actually trying to punish Black's play right away. So this, I think, is something that you should keep in mind. In some structures, you can delay castling because the king is safe in the center. And finally, there are some structures in chess where you actually don't need to castle at all. For example, this is a Caro-Kann or a French structure. We have this position right here, but the queens have been traded off. So there are going to be some situations when the queens are traded off, some pieces are traded off, and you don't necessarily have to castle in this position. Like, for example, you can castle kingside in this position and black is totally fine. I would even say black is slightly better. You can do the same thing over here. You can castle queenside and the king is also going to be safe on the queenside. You can move it to b8, then put the rook on c8 and so on. But you don't even have to do that either because you can just play king to d7 and the king is very safe. Why? Because the center is closed. So fundamentally, when we say that the king is not safe in the center, is because when you're in the center, theoretically, you can be attacked from 3 different directions, right? You can be attacked from the center, you can be attacked from the king side, and you can be attacked from the queen side. However, since the center is closed right now, you cannot be attacked from this side at all. So you're completely safe. And you can't be attacked from this side either because there's nothing that can attack you from over here. The light square bishop is gone, the queen is gone, and same thing from here. You can't really be attacked. So you would much rather have the king closer to the action with king to d7 rather than castling and having the king on g8 where it's further away. So you would rather have an active king on d7 and then you can bring the rook to c8 and then you can continue by probably just some remaneuvering or something like that, trying to double up on the c-file and continue like that. But the thing is, you have to keep in mind that there are going to be some situations where you don't have to castle at all and actually your king is not only safer in the center, but it's actually more active as well. It serves a bigger purpose because it's closer to the action.